Hello YouTube. Just wanted to offer another watch review of one of the watches in my collection. This one is one that I've had for quite some time now, for about 6 or 8 months. It's an Homage watch, of course. It's the Alpha Daytona Paul Newman. And of course everyone has their opinion about Homage watches. And I kind of aren't too critical of them because they are very helpful in getting people like me into the hobby of watches, and it's sort of what got me going. And my first phase was, of course, buying quite a few Homage watches, and this was one of them. And most of the ones I've had, I've sold since then. I've kind of moved on to some other brands, other more unique watches. But I've really come back to the Alpha Paul Newman as one that I want to keep. And this watch review kind of will tell you why I think it's worth keeping and worth having in a collection if you're fond of the Paul Newman Rolex style watch. So a little history behind the Rolex Paul Newman is that when it was first made, it was considered quite an ugly watch. People just didn't like it. The main features, of course, being the subdials, the contrasting dial, and the minute track around the edge. People just didn't like it, so Rolex didn't make a whole lot of them. But then, of course, it's made famous by somebody like Paul Newman. And then, of course, the watch picks up popularity over years. And when it's rare, which indeed it was at the time, because not a lot of them were made, it becomes very valuable. So today, if you want a new one, you're going to start around the $15,000 on up mark. If you get a vintage one, you're looking $100,000 on up, upwards to around $500,000. So the reason why I've kept this Homage in my collection is because, quite honestly, I'll never have a $15,000 watch. I'll never want a $15,000 watch, but I love this design, and so I'm happy. I'm cool with it. So this watch comes in a number of iterations. You can get it, of course, the most popular is that cream color dial with the black subdials, black dial with cream colored subdials. But I just went with the black and stainless steel look. I just think it's the cleanest. It's something that I can wear even at work in a shirt and tie kind of context. And so it works for me. I love this color combination. Also, for a little bit about the dimensions, it's a 40 millimeter, 39 millimeter officially, around 40 millimeter, I would say, and that's going all the way around the bezel. There's a lot of watch here for not a really big case. I was looking at the Speedmaster Reduced, thinking, it's 39 millimeter, 38 millimeter. Maybe that's a watch I could save up for, similar dimensions, but you're going to lose a couple of millimeters all the way around on the bezel for that one. So, this is about as small a watch as I'm comfortable with on my 7¼ inch wrist. But so other watches like the Speedmaster Reduced are going to be a little smaller than this. In fact, I brought along the Seiko SKX for comparison, and you can see that even though this is a 42 millimeter case, the case extends beyond the bezel, and so the bezel is almost exactly the same size. I mean, there's very little difference in the two. So I would compare this very much to my Seiko as far as size goes. And its thickness is largely because of the acrylic crystal. You see it's domed there, so that gives it a little thickness to the case. And the crystal, by the way, is what I think really draws me back to this watch. It's acrylic, so it's going to get scratches, but you can, of course, polish those out. No sapphire here, but it gives it that vintage vibe, and I love the way it looks. It does have that throwback style, and so I think the acrylic crystal was really the appropriate crystal for this. And it'll get a little character as it wears, and so it definitely has a throwback look to it. So 20 millimeter lugs, and the bracelet, people really dog this bracelet, but I have no problems with it. It does taper. I'm not a huge fan of tapering, but in this case it goes with that vintage look. So it does work well with the look of this watch. Now there's no extra guard here. This is just a regular clasp, and when it snaps, it's very solid. In fact, I really have to kind of dig in there. So I don't worry about losing this watch. Plenty of micro adjustments and a nice signed clasp there. So let's talk for a minute about the chronograph function of this watch, which of course so it makes it a great little piece and a very complicated movement. So screw down pushers on each one of those, and the pushers very firm, so very definitive push when you engage the chronograph. As you can see, it has rather smooth sweep. Of course, you would have to stop the chronograph before resetting. It doesn't have a lap time feature or anything like that, and has a 30-minute timer at the 3 o'clock position, and runs rather smoothly. Now, one thing you'll notice as it gets closer to the 60-second mark, notice the 3 o'clock dial. You'll see it advance from the 0 position to the 1 just as it crosses the noon, 12 o'clock. There it goes. So that's not an incremental dial, so it's going to advance as the chronograph hand hits the 60-second mark, which I think is a really nice feature. I've even seen reviews of very high-end Speedmasters where that happens either too soon or too late, and this happens right at the 60-second mark. Now, one thing I want you to know about this is I'm going to stop the chronograph and then I'm going to reset it. Okay, you see it snaps right back to noon. Now, let me tell you about this watch, and one thing to think about before you buy is the quality control on a Chinese watch isn't that high, of course. You see that's perfectly aligned right now, but that's only because I had to realign it myself. When I purchased this watch, it was about a fifth or maybe even a third of a second to the right, and it never did align up directly at the 60-second mark. And believe me, that really irritated me, annoyed me. I didn't send it back or anything like that. What I finally did is I took the case back off, pulled the crown. These pushers are not connected in. there's a button there that pushes a button inside the movement. So once you pull the crown, the movement just comes out. There's a little plastic retainer there that you snap out, and so I dropped the movement, took my hand's puller, and I placed it on there and pulled just the red chronograph hand off. And then I took a Post-it note and used the end of the Post-it note to kind of hold it. And once I got it lined, I would gently press it in place with my puller, and I would have it directly lined up at noon, and no matter how I pushed it, it would slip back into that position to the right. So it was really annoying. So I finally tried putting it in a little bit to the left, and of course it snapped right into place straight at noon, the 60-second mark. And I was very relieved because I'm not a big do-it-yourselfer guy, but I thought I would try that, and it worked. And as you can see, it's beautifully aligned, and that just really makes me happy. Yeah, those are the little details that when you own a watch, you notice, and once you notice them, you can't unnotice them. And so that's good. One more thing about this movement, and I would appreciate any comments down below about this, but I've noticed there are times where I stop the chronograph and I reset it, and it doesn't reset to noon. It resets maybe about 5, or it doesn't quite go all the way back. I have to run the chronograph again, get it down further in the lower register here, stop it, and then it will reset. It doesn't happen often, but it just makes me wonder if sometimes the mechanism lines up, especially as the chronograph is stopped closer to the 60-second mark, that once that happens, there's something about the mechanics of this movement that make it sometimes hard to realign. So this has happened to me 4 or 5 times since I've owned the watch, and I let the chronograph run a little while, stop it, and then line it back up. So that does happen. Maybe that happens on all mechanical chronographs. I do not know. So if you know, contribute to this whole discussion. I'd really appreciate it. So now let's take a look at the movement. Wanted to give you a look at the movement. It's a very beautiful movement for the price you're paying for this watch. The case back is not an easy thing to get off. I tell you, the easiest way to do it is just take a wadded up bit of duct tape and it'll grab onto it and screw it right off. But the movement is very well done, very nicely decorated for a watch of this price. The movement has a 42-hour power reserve, which I think is very generous. I really like the fact that sometimes when I come back from a weekend vacation, it's my weekend away. It's my only watch that's still running. The hand winding action on this movement is very crisp. And once it's wound up, you'll see there's a little play in this. That really concerned me at first, how much play was in the stem. But I believe that's just the nature of this watch. That's the nature of the design. The idea is once you push it in, this becomes disengaged. It's like a little clutch there, and so it keeps it from when it gets hit. It keeps the impact from doing damage to the movement. So anyway, it winds very nicely, and then you feel it reach the end, and then you just screw it right back in. So that's the movement. And now a wrist shot. Let you see it on my 7 1/4 inch wrist. I think it just wears very nicely. It very smooth, and the bracelet is very comfortable around the wrist. And you can see it gives you a nice design there, or a nice look. Also, I would add that if you, I'm totally a bracelet guy, but if you're looking for a leather strap, these give the watch quite an amazing look. So the red stitching on the black leather, this particular aftermarket strap is really just sets the watch off very nicely. So to wrap up this review, we have the chronograph going one more time, and let you get a look at that. This is also 30 meters water resistant, though I wouldn't really recommend that, given there's just too many places for water to get in. I think it'd be fine though in your normal day-to-day use, hand washing, things like that. One issue I do have with the watch is the hands. They're stainless steel, and they do kind of blend in with the dial. As I get older, I like a watch that there's more contrast to the hands. There's not much contrast, but that's probably why it doesn't get more wrist time for that single reason alone. But otherwise, it's a very comfortable watch, and just looks good. Every time I consider selling it, I just think, man, I'd hate to let this go for the price I paid. Lume, almost non-existent, as typical of Alpha watches. I don't ever depend on this watch at night. But again, it is what it is for $155 or less. But I think you'll be happy, and we'll reset the chronograph one more time. And if you can get a copy that's right at noon, man, then you'll be thrilled. And once I was able to realign the chronograph secondhand, I was just absolutely fell in love with this watch again. Well, thanks for tuning in. If you have any questions, please put them down below in the comments. I'm glad to answer anytime.